Golden Eagles, it's time to talk. I'm your host, MARISA Martinez, and I'm here with my co-host, Joshua Laytona.
Hello.
For those of you who don't know, I am the digital editor of the University Times and the station manager for the Golden Eagle Radio. Joshua Laytona is the editor-in-chief of the University Times and the program director for Golden Eagle Radio. Time to Talk is a show that brings together Golden Eagle Radio and the University Times to discuss campus news and issues or anything that connects back to Cal State LA in some way. Today, we are also joined by a couple of stellar freelance photographers, Zin Chiang, former editor-in-chief of the Corsair and at Santa Monica College, where she studied photojournalism, Ben Camacho, a University of Laverne graduate, who's been featured in LA Taco and covered the migrant caravan between 2018 and 2019. Jayrol San Jose, who studied at Santa Monica College, has documented border issues, where he produced short documentaries on the matter. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. Hello, everyone.
So we're recording this episode on Wednesday, June 10th, around 2:30 in the afternoon. And you can see our show when it airs on the University Times website at csulauniversitytimes.com or listen to it on goldeneagleradio.org. Recently, you all have been covering the Black Lives Matter movement and the police brutality protests. These marches are sparked by the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who died at the hands of police. What has it been like covering these protests where police brutality has been more highlighted than anything? What moments during your coverage have stood out to you?
For me, I would say that most of the protests are peaceful. If you've been to any protest in Los Angeles, it's pretty much the same as any of those. People walking around with signs. It's a mass number of people, and we're kind of just walking around the streets. The idea that it is a protest against police brutality, and when the police brutality meets these people protesting against it, that's when you start to see this violence and the news and what people show on their feeds and the stuff that they're recording of police messing with these protesters. It's them just using force for no reason. Being on the ground there, I see no reason to stop the march, to meet them head on. For whatever reason, it's really all for nothing, considering the only really bad thing that happened probably was the precinct being burned to the ground in Minneapolis. Nothing else all around the United States has even come close to that. So them just, I think, showing their aggression against people who are protesting against police brutality and them using their force on them it's an interesting thing that happens. Oh, fuck. What is this? Somebody rang me. That for me, kind of being down there, it has an energy that you want to be a part of. And I think if you have been trying to get out of the house, I know it's a lot of people, but it is definitely worth being down there and seeing what the movement is all about and what people are protesting.
I tend to agree. And to me, what's really interesting is the protests and the police interaction or response in turn became an experiment that in some ways proved what protesters are saying about how police brutality works, because as we can see throughout the 2 weeks, that when the police backed off or when the National Guards were in charge of crowd control, you see less violence and you see less to no looting happening in other parts of the city. And it was very, very apparent. It's been well documented by both civilians and journalists. And I found that to be something that is heartening and interesting, but also saddening that that a lot of people did get hurt through the use of supposedly non-lethal weapons against protesters, because although they're non-lethal, it is, you know, it's still dangerous. You know, these non-lethal weapons must be used in a specific way, and it's pretty much dumb luck, you know, for you to have that projectile hit you in the way that won't kill you or maim you, and it's not guaranteed, and it's not as safe as the authorities say that it is.
And Ben, you mentioned that you've seen those rubber bullets at their worst. Can you tell us what that was like in that situation?
Yeah, it was, I think it was on Fairfax and 3rd. Not this past weekend, but the previous one, when there was a lot of smashing of police vehicles. But it was just kind of in the heat of everything. Like, I was right on the front where the police line was, and then right where the protesters were kind of just like in each other's faces. And then obviously you get like rubber bullets getting thrown. And so when that happens, people tend to kind of like run backwards for a quick second. And then people kind of like are like, wait, no, it didn't hit me. So they go back. And in that moment where people are like running back, I'm like turned around and I see this person with like this like gash like opened up in their like on the back of their hand right here, and there's somebody else who's like holding their hand and they're like pouring water on it, and it was just like right there in my face, and it was just a straight up just open hand, you know, like it wasn't like a cut or anything like that. It was, I could see the flesh under the skin. And I think, you know, I grabbed a quick photo of it, and I think in those moments when like you start to see like the actual physical like consequences of like non-lethal weaponry used against protesters, it kind of like grounds you, especially like being there not as a protester but like as a photojournalist. It kind of like reminds you like, hey, like although, you know, you're here as like press, you know, that could have very easily been like my hand or like Jayrol's hand, who was with me that day. And yeah, I think that just this kind of goes back to like me having different interactions throughout this whole thing with during the protests with LAPD, where we're seeing just like an infringement on like freedom of the press and just the way they've been handling access for the press during these things. But yeah.
If you're just tuning in, this is Time to Talk, a show about Cal State LA news and issues. We're just discussing the hundreds of recent social justice and police brutality protests that have been headed by Black Lives Matter. Our special guests today have been covering these protests regularly and make sure that they're documenting what's happening during these uncertain times. Josh, I believe, my co-host Josh, that he had a question for you guys regarding how you guys prep for these situations.
Thanks, Marisa. No, for sure. She already sort of, put the nail on the head. Getting ready for the protest, going out with your equipment. Like, what is it that you guys should do to prep for going out? Obviously, you try and take care of your camera, but like just the mental state of being out there in the crowd, especially during coronavirus. Like, what are some of the things you guys do to prep yourself to go out there?
You have to charge your batteries. Not only charging them, you have to bring your batteries. Other than that, I mean, my camera gear is always set up, ready to go. Most of the time, it's all about charging batteries. As far as, like you mentioned, the coronavirus, we purchased a big bag of masks that is kept in our vehicle that those are just in case. Both me and Ben, during all of the coverage, we've actually been wearing these 3M respirators, or like a kind of a bigger version of it, but just to kind of keep safe. And you don't want to, I mean, it's okay. I don't mind if I get it. I don't want to be responsible for giving it to anybody, is kind of my fear about it, is like knowing that I had it and then all of a sudden I was in this crowd of hundreds of people and I'm, breathing on everybody. So as far as that, I mean, it's just the normal checks. Typically you want to, I've been shooting video and it requires a lot more crap. I keep a drone in the bag. I have an extra lens that I need. I carry 2 cameras on me. As far as it being protected, I treat my camera gear pretty crappily, so it kind of gets thrown around already. So I'm not really too worried about it hitting the floor or anything. And but for me, batteries definitely is, maybe cards.
Cool. I think I'm kind of the same way in that sense. Like, I already know, like, my camera is just a tool. Like, it is what it is. It's material, and like, yeah, it would suck if a cop stepped on it or like it got knocked out of my hands. But like, I'm privileged enough where I can, like, I have some money saved up and I can like just go and buy one. If that emergency did happen. I think for me, the bigger thing that I want to talk about more is like just like the mental state of like getting out there and being out there and staying out there day after day after day after day. I think it's interesting because like I had this moment like when I first even found out there was going to be a protest like 2 weeks ago. I was in Chinatown and like I was just getting some sandwiches, and then I see these like helicopters and I'm just like, what the heck is that, And then I looked on this like Citizen app. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it like shows you where stuff's happening. And I looked it up and it's like, boom, protests. And I was just like, all right, like I'm going to drop everything and just like get to it. And on the way there, I could like feel myself like getting nervous and just like getting like a little bit shaky, just because like I've seen some like pretty intense stuff also doing coverage down in Tijuana. So it was kind of like preparing myself to get back into that like adrenaline state and like remembering what not to do and like remembering the buddy system and just like keeping yourself in check the whole time and making sure like if things are getting out of hand, am I okay going with that? Or like you got to know when to stop for yourself, or else like it's gonna come home with you, and then you got to do it the next day if you want to go out. Just always like for me, it's always like at the end of the day or night or like even before you go, I always just like take a moment or an hour to just like chill out and just like breathe, like listen to some music, and yeah, just like kind of like ground yourself through all that as you're going.
For me, I think most of the preparation, aside from making sure you have the gear, is getting the background information, because the way I work, knowing the history of the organization and the people that are involved, and the history of the movement, and just different things that are going to happen throughout the day is an important part of my process too, because a lot of times protests and news events don't pan out the way you expect it to. And a big part of being a photojournalist or a journalist in general is being able to react and find, be one step ahead of the crowd and know where you need to be in position to catch, important events that might happen. So I do a lot of research. A lot of times when things happen quickly, I'm doing research as I'm getting out the door, you know, or, you know, as I'm parked, you know, near the event or a gathering. And as things develop, I'm continuously reevaluating my approach and doing more research and developing more contacts. I feel like in terms of safety, for me, a big thing is the fear, anxiety, and the adrenaline part of me shuts down because I'm in a state where I'm just in a heightened sense of situational awareness. So where you park your car, you know, can you get back to your car, dropping a pin? And maybe if you feel like roads are going to be blocked off, then you go and move your car because you think that, you know, if the crowd goes this way and the skirmish happens, then you can probably go down this side street behind this shop and get to your car. So I think those are constantly things that are happening simultaneously to most photojournalists, aside from the basics, you know, that you're just, you know, constantly reassessing and inputting new information that you're learning and reacting to that, and adjusting your approach, which I feel like is healthy in many ways because it helps us really portray what's really happening, instead of going out there and just looking for your shot list. Oh, there's a protest. I want the person with, you know, their fist in the air, or I want this, or I need a shot of an arrest, but really just being in tune with the situation and, you know, and capturing what's actually happening.
Thanks. And those are all great points from you guys, especially on the mental state, for sure. And that's really what I think the heart of the question was, just trying to figure out going out there and your process. But I also wanted to ask you guys real quick, because I think 2020 has been a big sort of mess of a year if you look at all that's happened, for sure. But what I really want to know is, in a lot of ways, history is happening as we speak. And as you guys, as photographers, you're going out there and you're capturing things that I think a lot of students are going to be reading about in their textbooks in a couple of years from now. Like, there will be books about this stuff, about coronavirus, the protests going on right now. Like, it just feels like such a different energy compared to a lot of the protests we've seen in the past. So I wanted to see if you guys were get your thoughts on what it's like to really sort of document history and be at the forefront of that in this era right now.
I think when people say that, you know, that you're at the forefront of documenting history, oftentimes they refer to catastrophic or major events like the Black Lives Matter movement right now, or the Women's March that happened a couple years ago. But I feel like as a photojournalist, that is just basically what you do. Because oftentimes we document smaller stories that get less attention, but that is still part of history. So I do feel like I'm part of something bigger when it's a more widely known and significant story. There's definitely a sense of responsibility that comes with it. But I feel like, having been a photojournalist for a while, I do treat every story with equal regard, because no matter how famous the subject matter is, it's always true, and it's always worth documenting.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you on that. I feel like as when I talk to like my friends or like family, and they're like asking me about like the stuff I've seen, or like they're like, wow, like you were there. It's like, it gets to a point where, like, especially as like a photojournalist and like being on the front lines of stuff, it kind of gets normalized for you. That sometimes, yeah, like I forget that's like, oh yeah, this is like a big thing. But I also I want to just reiterate that point you said about how it's like the smaller stories too. Like, that's, I think those smaller things are like symptoms of like the bigger story, and I feel like in that way they're connected. Like, I don't know, just off the top of my head, like Jayrol and I are working on this story about Chinatown and gentrification there, and we had this interview with like a family, and like they're talking about like you know, like food insecurity, and like how the neighborhood just feels less safe overall, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like when you consider like those things, it's like those are issues that people out there are protesting about, you know, like that is coronavirus, like that is over policing of communities, that is like criminalization of communities. And like as much as like we or people like to see photos of like, you know, the fist up in the air, like, you know, just like the stuff that kind of makes you like, whoa, that's a cool photo. Like, yeah, just like the smaller stuff too. It's equally as important to understand like the larger
Right.
movements or things we're seeing in the news lately.
Yeah, again, agree with everything these two are saying. And I think too, when you decide to become a photojournalist, like you start seeing the world differently. And like Ben says, the word normalized for us, right? So when we see Black Lives Matter and people protesting, we're like, yes, finally, you know, people are seeing this. And I think that's what's good about the movement being so big and large, that like it's on a scale that's so big. But again, like to that point about smaller stories, like those smaller stories happen every single day.
Yeah.
And they do play this in the role of the giant one as well, like both of these guys are saying. And it's I being on the front lines again, I think it's been really nice to see the amount of people and people that don't usually speak out actually talk about issues that are controversial. I mean, you will find out things about your friends you didn't even know, and you may lose some, you may gain some new friends, but yeah, I think this being such a big part of history, it really does feel like a shift because of just how widespread it is throughout media and throughout the world, pretty much.
Yeah, it really, that does really, what you guys are doing is really meaningful to what, you know, it's going to be reflective of what 2020 has been. So you guys get to visually represent that in your work. And I think that's really important for everyone to see what was going on during these protests, what was going on during the civil unrest, that just where people just had enough of what was going on. So what you guys are doing is really just documenting history, whether it be the smaller stories that connect to the larger ones. They're all just as equally important. And I think that's really great. I think that's awesome. If you guys are just joining us, welcome. This is Time to Talk. I'm MARISA Martinez, and I'm joined by my co-host Joshua Latona. Our special guests today are Zin Chiang, Ben Camacho, Jayrol San Jose. We're discussing what they do to prepare for protest coverage, and what it's like covering these very important issues during these uncertain times. However, we are going to transition to our last and final question for you three. With the work that you've done covering these past few weeks, what projects do you hope to accomplish with your images and the photojournalism coverage that you've done so far?
I think as a journalist, the more you do, the more the branches kind of expand from whatever you're doing. So the more and more work you do, the more people you meet, the more stuff you find out, the more stories you have. And for the protests, I mean, it has so many paths, and we've talked to so many people. There's just an unlimited amount of projects and things that you can tell. You know, as myself, I wouldn't be able to cover everything that you would want to. I think focusing on things that you are a little more passionate about, or something that's kind of close to home, really helps hone in on which projects you want to work on. But I think Ben can maybe answer this a little more, but we've been kind of working on the idea of just how the police work in just these lower class communities, and what the lower class, how they kind of feel about the policing that's been going on there. I think that's kind of stemmed out of our coverage from the Frank Hernandez police video of him beating up the homeless man. We went to the Holbrook, is it Holbrook? Yeah, we went there to the police station there, Hollenbeck, and we kind of talked to the community there, and there's a lot going on, and it's something that kind of, it opens your eyes when you actually meet the people that are actually living these lives, you know, being as privileged as we are to be able to just kind of be in our bubbles, meeting people and learning that there's way more stuff going on than you could ever document and kind of tell and help tell is kind of crazy. So
the project that Jayrol's talking about, we're looking at like just like the role of like police within like disinvested, underrepresented communities without like throughout LA. I think something that like really stuck out to me the day that we were at Hollenbeck was when we were interviewing like anyone we could who was there, and then we had this like realization that almost everybody there knows someone or they themselves have been brutalized by the police. And like when you're in a space that like holds so much like trauma or like PTSD,
yeah,
you can't ignore that, you know. I'm a very like empathetic person, and so like just like having that realization made me just kind of like, whoa, like this is a huge issue here. But I mean, yeah, we're focusing on that project, especially now that, I mean, we're seeing like federal like agencies like Border Patrol being deployed to assist local law enforcement. I mean, that's a sign of something else in the works there. But yeah, aside from that, I still want to, once like, I guess once the pandemic kind of like clears out a little bit more, I want to revisit the series that I had, the No Country May Claim Us photography exhibit that I curated. And Jayrol and I have been talking about future projects that like involve the border and like other topics surrounding migration and immigration. Yeah.
In terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, I think my current focus is doing more research on the different types of voices and interest groups from various communities, because looking in from the outside, from a privileged standpoint or from a somewhat dissociative standpoint, it looks like one large movement where everybody's chanting the same slogans. But once you're on the ground and you meet people who, like Ben said, are in these communities and they each have individual stories and you hear their thoughts, you quickly realize that there are many ways to skin a cat, and not every activist believes in the same solutions. You have defund the police, you have people who are adamant that voting is the solution. You know, you have people who are staunch disciples of Martin Luther King versus people who try to emulate the Black Panthers. And you have all these non-African American allies who all have their own social circles and belief systems. And I feel like it's important for me to illustrate that, even though I don't think it's possible to comprehensively represent every single voice. So that will be my short-term goal. And in terms of other projects, I I feel like the tough thing about the coronavirus and the current situation is I'm not able to plan very well. So I'm taking it a day at a time, and I think what's ahead of me is to speak to various student leaders and young thought leaders that are within these communities, and to figure out what the climate really is like.
Sorry. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Real quick before we start signing off, is there anywhere where we can check out your guys' work? Do you guys have websites or account ads that we can search you guys at?
Yeah, I have my website. It's just my first name, last name.com, and then Instagram, Ben Camacho with a 0 at the end.
For me, it's ZinChiang.com, and I'm Zin Chiang on Twitter and Instagram and most social media sites.
Jayrol.com, and on Instagram at Jayroy, Jayroi.
Hi. Okay, well, thanks so much for listening in, Golden Eagles. This has been Time to Talk. I want to thank my co-host, Joshua Laytona, and our special guests, Zin Chiang, Ben Camacho, Jayrol San Jose. You all three have been awesome. Thank you for being here today. For the university, this is for the University Times and Golden Eagle Radio. I'm MARISA Martinez, and as always, stay safe. Thanks.